All right, I think we got just about everybody. So good morning and welcome. We're gonna use Pear Deck a lot today, but when don't we? Um, so our plan, um, it's the end of the semester, right? And I do have a check-in for you this morning. Calling it "Hold On to It and Let It Go," really as an opportunity to reflect on this weird, strange, chaotic semester that we've all experienced together. Um, with the understanding and admission that when we come back after winter break, it's not going to be that different. Although I do have one change I want to make sure that we highlight because the information came out late last week for everybody, not just for this class. I'll come back to that in a moment. So it's going to be like this for a while longer, and maybe a lot longer, maybe the rest of the year. If I were to make a prediction, that would be my prediction for sure, that it will be holding this pattern through May. So the news that came out late last week that applies particularly to the folks learning from home is that you are now going to be asked to exclusively attend afternoon sessions from home. So there will no longer be an AM, PM session for at-home students, okay? You're just going to log in the afternoon. So I guess that means you get to sleep in if you so choose. For folks learning in the building, nothing's going to change. All right. If your last name starts with A through L, you're still going to be a morning student. If you're an M through Z, you're going to be an afternoon student. So of course, I wonder as an adult, why wouldn't everybody just suddenly move to learning at home? Because that means you get to sleep in. But that's just my thinking out loud. But please be aware of that I will not be Zooming with folks in the morning any longer. I'll be exclusively, and all of your teachers really should be Zooming with folks in the afternoon alone. So does that bring up any questions for you before we hop into the lesson for the day? Okay. Well, if anything pops up, don't hesitate to ask. I just wanted to make sure that you got that news. Because it was a surprise to me when I saw it on Friday. All right. So our check-in for the day, honestly, let's celebrate a little bit. We did it, right? This is crazy. This has been crazy. I think I've said it before. As a teacher, this has been ridiculously hard. There are human beings on my roster that I've never seen. And I literally mean I've never seen your face. That is remarkable. So weird. And yet we did it. So as we get started this morning, what I wanted to give you the opportunity to do is think back over last school year, the summer, this school year, something in this class, something in school in general, something in your life in general that you want to hold on to as we make the transition out of this year and into next year, and something that you want to let go. If you could take a moment just before we get started with the biology to reflect on what you want to keep doing, but also something, nah, I'm done with it, once the calendar turns to 2021. I guess I was a little ahead of schedule there. Even I'm out of sync. Again, What would you keep doing? What's working? What are you willing to let go of? Even if it doesn't actually happen, right? What are you willing to let go of? Give them their minute just to think, to write, to draw, to type. All right, the numbers aren't moving much. I'm assuming people who are willing to share have shared. So we can take a look. And that's the last class. You folks are going to be at the bottom. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and just work my way back up towards the top. Yeah. Stress. I know that. Procrastinating. It's a hard one. If anybody's interested, you can put something in the chat or, say it out loud. I can tell you what psychiatrists and psychologists actually believe is responsible for procrastination if you're interested. There's a lot of myths around it. So just let me know if you want me to share about that real quick. Yeah. There it is again, procrastinating. That would be great if you're aware that you're taking advantage of teachers. Please stop. Seriously. Speaking as a teacher, that sucks. Yeah. We're almost a ways away, but worrying about grades. Yeah. It's hard not to be on a screen, though, when school is taking place on a screen for a lot of people. Yeah. Yeah. There it is again. Yeah. So I love that. Strength and courage. Yeah. I hope you can see what I'm seeing. Everything. Yeah. For the same stressors, college apps, standardized tests that still exist in the context of what we're all experiencing. Man, it's a tough one. Okay. All right. All right. So there's some people who wanted me to comment on the procrastination. And Sonia, if you can see what she wrote, she put something in the chat to everybody. Yeah, it's emotional management. There's this myth that people work better under pressure, and that's why they wait. And of course, there's also a myth that people are lazy, right? And they're not, and they're unmotivated, and that's why they procrastinate. But in fact, the reason why people procrastinate is because the task that they're procrastinating around has an emotional consequence associated with it. It doesn't make us feel good. And duh, we avoid it because it doesn't make us feel good. Right? Think about that just in a brief context, right? When you go to study, what do you study first? The hard stuff or the easy stuff? The stuff you already know and feel comfortable and confident with, or the stuff that you don't feel as comfortable and confident with? If I were wagering, I would say it's the former and not the latter. And that's because you're a human being, not because of anything wrong with you. But what if we began to think about procrastination in the context of emotions and the way that whatever that task is makes us feel, and to notice how it makes us feel, to name it, and then be kind to ourselves as we try to work through those feelings? I wonder if procrastination would change and our approach to that task would change as a result. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. Something I noticed that actually is something I want to hold on to is the way that we do assessments in this class. I've never done anything like this before. And really, the take-home assessments, the open note assessments, they were out of necessity. I could not imagine having time with such limited amounts of time available to begin with, making time available for you folks to take an assessment. I had a teacher come in this morning and ask, do you use lockdown browsers on your assessments? And I'm like, no, they've been take home and open note all semester. But that of course means that your experience someplace else, and maybe lots of other places, has been the opposite of what it's been in this class, right? Teachers still concerned about test security and academic integrity. Let's use the real word, cheating. Really? That's what's important right now? You folks have been able to cheat forever and always. We can lock down your browsers all day long. You're just going to pull out your phones or your other laptop or your parents' computer or whatever. Come on. Let's be honest with each other. What's most important? The learning or the grade? The test security or the learning? Right? You folks, and I know some of you do it, I'm not oblivious, right? You're Googling these AP questions. You're looking for the correct answers. Go for it. It only hurts you. It doesn't hurt me. It doesn't have any effect on me. It only affects your learning. But how it does affect me is that as an adult and a teacher in this building, if we created a learning environment where that seems like something you need to do, then we are failing you miserably. So I'm not going to take part in it. And as we move into next semester, heck, as I move into future years of teaching this course, I'm probably going to keep doing it. Take-home assessments, open note. Because the AP exam isn't about memorization in the first place. So what's the harm in having your notes? What's the harm in taking the time that you need to answer these questions? What am I letting go? This is a tough one for me, but I think I saw it in at least one response. Complaining. My mom was in human resources for a long time. She's retired, but she shared something with me a few weeks ago, and when she said it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. But I don't know that she's wrong. She said, "Adam, either stop complaining or quit." I said, "Huh? Yeah, because the complaining's not getting me anywhere, and I'm not at a point where I'm going to quit. But I'm going to stop complaining. I'm going to let it go. Because it's not serving me. And maybe it doesn't serve you either." So those are my holding on tos and letting it go for what they're worth. Thank you as always for sharing as we hop into the biology for the day. Going back to the agenda just briefly, I contemplated doing a lab write-up with you during the time that we have together this morning. I don't think it's a great idea. Okay. And there's lots of reasons for that. One, I don't think it's a good use of our time. Two, the results that you folks here in the classroom collected, they're kind of all over the place. So trying to make meaning of them would take us probably longer than is beneficial. And for the folks who did the virtual lab, the results are so clean that I really want everybody to understand why the results are the way that they are, rather than, force ourselves to do something that I don't even know is going to be really helpful in the first place. So there isn't going to be a lab write-up for lab number 9, whether you did it virtually or you did it in person. Instead, what I thought we could do is look at some practice multiple choice questions and some practice free response questions that get to the concepts that are addressed in this lab in the first place. Okay, so just to reiterate, there's nothing that you have to turn in for lab number 9. It's not an assignment, it's not homework, it's not due tomorrow, it certainly isn't due over break. We're gonna tackle what we need to tackle today in class, okay? Sound like a plan? Thumbs up. Thank you. You've done enough. You've done enough. All right, so let's dive into this. I thought actually starting with a really basic question, just in respect to enzymes and how enzymes are doing their job would be helpful. So take a moment, read the question, study the diagram, and then choose the answer that makes the most sense to you as we get started with all of this. Try to get your answer in. This is how I know that you're here, that you're participating. No, they're not turning anything in. Okay, this is it. This is gonna be, what we do today is gonna be our lab write-up. So that part of what I texted last week is still true. There's nothing to turn in. You folks have done enough. This is my holiday gift to you all. All right. So as we get started thinking about the role of enzymes in different biochemical reactions, absolutely. This is what I'm hoping you're already taking away. And maybe we're taking away back when you watched the Edpuzzle videos on enzyme structure and function. All right, so I need to pause for a second. I'm getting the same thing in the chat. And I'm so deeply concerned about this right now because I don't want you to think I'm playing a game of gotcha. Okay, there is no lab write-up for lab number 9 that needs to be turned in. What we do today, okay, in class together is going to meet the requirements for that lab write-up. There's nothing else that you need to do today other than be present, participate, and pay attention. Okay? Seriously. This is it. Clear? Thank you. I hope they're not adults that are playing a game of gotcha with you, where they say one thing and then do the opposite. All right, back to the question. Okay, this is what enzymes do, right? And we've done some work with energy diagrams this semester. Heck, the last lab, lab number 8, with that really simple experiment with carbohydrate hydrolysis, dealt with a catalyst, not an enzyme catalyst, right, but a proton catalyst that lowered the activation energy barrier, right, for this biochemical reaction and allowed the reaction to take place in a way that it wouldn't have taken place without the presence of that catalyst. What are catalysts doing? And an enzyme is just a biological catalyst. It's lowering the activation energy barrier for that process and allowing a reaction to occur more quickly than it would have occurred otherwise. Okay, so the lower hump that you see, if I bring up my pen, right, the lower hump that you see here, that's the energy diagram for the reaction with the enzyme. The higher hump, right, the higher magnitude hump is the energy diagram for the reaction without the enzyme. So really what we're doing is we're creating an environment, we're creating a scenario where with the enzyme being present, there's enough energy in the system to overcome that barrier. Where without the enzyme, there isn't enough energy available in the system to overcome that barrier. And as a consequence, the reaction is not taking place. So what do enzymes do to answer Paige's question? Enzymes lower the activation energy barrier, the activation energy threshold, right, for a biochemical reaction. So the lower, let me change colors here, right, the lower, the green in this case, and I can change you can read that okay. I might have to change to my pen here. It's a little messy. So I went from top to bottom. The higher hump, right, with the greater energy of activation barrier, that's without the enzyme. And then the hump that's smaller with a lower energy of activation barrier is the energy diagram for the reaction with the enzyme. And it's through lowering this barrier that reactions are able to occur much more quickly. Okay. And this is really the step one of the lab that we did, whether you did it virtually or in person. We were trying to establish negative control conditions, right? Where the enzyme either wasn't present, if you were here in the classroom, or by changing the conditions in the virtual experiment, we were making the enzyme incapable of catalyzing the reaction. And as a consequence, there wasn't a reaction taking place. There was no product being generated, at least not any product that could be measured in a meaningful way. And that was because the barrier was too high to be overcome. And the reaction either wasn't taking place or was taking place so slowly that for all intents and purposes, it wasn't taking place. And we knew that because there wasn't any product being generated. Okay. So let me just pause there before we move forward. Is that bringing up any questions or things you're uncertain about? So absolutely, going back, enzymes reduce the activation energy required for a reaction. That lower line in this diagram is the energy diagram for the reaction with the enzyme. And the diagram in blue, right, in this case, would be the energy diagram for the reaction without the enzyme. All right, so moving forward, again, in the spirit of practice questions, I wanted to say, if you did the in-person lab, even if your results were kind of all over the place, the reaction itself does work. You folks are rookies, right? Some of you were having issues with the pipetters and the pipettes. That's okay. That means you're high school students that are just beginning to work with this equipment. So the fact that you were getting, some really interesting measurements doesn't mean that you were doing anything wrong. It just means that you were learning how to do it. So I wanted to show you some of the results that I collected, not to demonstrate that, oh, well, here's what you were supposed to get, and if you didn't get it, you failed. Oh my gosh, what a terrible sentiment to share, right? It's that the reaction does work. And if you did the reaction for the virtual experiment, the results were so clean that these are the sorts of results that you would have collected as well, right? So the three lines up top are the rates of the enzyme catalyzed reaction, right? Now note, why is it a rate? Because it's a change in absorbance over a change in time. And an increasing absorbance level was indicative of more product being generated, right? And we measured that product with a color change. Whether you did it in person or virtually, there was a color change taking place inside the cuvette, and we could measure the intensity of that color change by making an absorbance measurement with a spectrophotometer. The darker the solution, the more colored the solution, the higher absorbance, the more product that was present over the course of time. So we can measure the rate, the change in absorbance over the change in time, and then plot those data points, use a best fit line, right? Draw a best fit line through those data points, and you can't see it perfectly because I can't really scroll up and down on this image. But the slope of that best fit line, just like in physics, is the rate of the process. It's the rate of the enzyme catalyzed reaction. So we can see that there's subtle differences in the rate of the enzyme catalyzed reaction as I change something like pH, right? But I can go a step further, right? The red line here, this is my negative control. This would be a set of experimental conditions where the enzyme either isn't present, right, or isn't working in an expected way, right? I do not expect there to be a change to the dependent variable because the enzyme either isn't there or isn't working. Well, look at that. That's a straight line, right? That's a horizontal line. There's no slope associated with that line. Why? Because there's no reaction taking place. The rate is in essence 0. And I can go a step further. We'll circle back to this at the end of the lesson today. I can actually take my reaction. I can have enzyme present, but I can change the conditions. Grab my pen here one more time. I can change the conditions in a way where the enzyme is present, but it's not working. Right? The conditions are so extreme that I've done something to the enzyme where I know this line is not perfectly horizontal, but it's nowhere near what it looks like in the case of the purple, the green, or the blue lines up above. And that's because I've actually denatured the enzyme. I've changed its physical structure in a way where it no longer works. And as a consequence, the reaction is not taking place. And why is it not taking place? Because the energy of activation barrier is too high to be overcome without the enzyme. Okay? So pausing there. Does this bring up any questions for you? In the chat or out loud, whatever works best. So what we want to do, and at this point, my hope is you understand the basics, right, by watching the Edpuzzle videos in respect to how enzymes do their job, right? So there are enzyme molecules, they are three-dimensional proteins, they are biological catalysts, and their job is to convert substrate, reactant, into product, okay? And the product that we generated either in the virtual lab or the in-person lab is a colored molecule. It's a molecule that we could see being formed and we can measure the amount of with the spectrophotometer. Okay. But it's also important to note that the enzyme molecule itself, the purple blob in this image, is converting the substrate into the product and then being reused. Okay. It's not really ever going away. But we can change the conditions around the enzyme in such a way that we can get the enzyme either to work faster or not as fast, right? By changing the way the enzyme interacts with the substrate, by changing the way the enzyme actually produces product per unit time. And that's what these practice questions are all about today. If I change the conditions that around the enzyme, how can I actually affect the reaction that I'm studying? Okay, so the scenario that we're going to start with is a pretty simple one. Okay, two different reactions, right? So think of two different test tubes. In one of the test tubes, I have 1x amount of enzyme. In the other test tube, I have a reaction mixture where there's twice as much enzyme present. Okay, so in the chat, if you could, predict just based on that one difference in the conditions, okay? Predict how you think doubling the amount of enzyme will affect the rate of the enzyme catalyzed reaction. I bet you could answer in a sentence. So in the chat, if you double the amount of enzyme, what is the effect on the enzyme catalyzed reaction? Seeing rate doubles, increase the rate by 2 times, perhaps double, rate will increase. Yeah, absolutely. If I double the number of enzyme molecules that are present, I'm providing more enzyme molecules within my little reaction container to interact with the substrate, to convert the substrate into product. So I would expect to get, I don't know for sure that it's going to be twice as much, but it's totally a valid prediction that I would get more and maybe twice as much, right, of product if I have twice the number of enzyme molecules present. Okay? So with that prediction in mind, let's try an AP question. So give yourself an opportunity to read the question and look at the data table. When you're ready, since you're in student mode now, go to the next slide and sketch the two graphs. You are not going to be able to be perfect here. Don't worry about the scale. Try to draw two lines. One that you think shows that I guess illustrates the data when there's 1x amount of enzyme, and then a second line that shows what doubling the amount of enzyme would do. There isn't going to be a spot to explain it, so we're just sketching two lines on that set of axes. So if you're getting stuck, use the data that's provided as a guide for what the graph looks like in general when there's 1x amount of enzyme, right? And use that as a reference to draw the second line when there's twice as much enzyme present. It's a quick sketch, like think of back of the napkin, right? Really the only label that you would need is which line is which. All right, hoping you're getting your responses in. I'm going to take you out of student mode here for a second so that we can look at the scoring guide for this free response question. Again, it's from an released AP exam. Come on, buddy. Okay. So I get my pen up here again. There's different ways that you might go about answering the question, okay? The orange line, this is what the graph would look like if you plotted the data in the data table, all right? So we're converting starch, the reactant, the substrate, into maltose, the product, it's a disaccharide. And we're monitoring the concentration of maltose over the course of time, okay? And what we're noticing, right, is that the amount of maltose increases initially over the course of time, but eventually it plateaus, right? And it probably plateaus in this case because we've converted all of the starch into maltose after about, I don't know, what do you think, 35 minutes or so? Okay, but that's the line for 1x amount of enzyme. If I take your prediction into mind, the predictions that you wrote in the chat, I've got two different lines, both of which answer the question. And the key to note really is this part of the graph, right? The rate at which the maltose is being produced, if I follow the logic that you folks wrote in the chat, is twice as high, right? It's twice as great as it is with the 1x amount of enzyme. And we can see that with the slopes, right, of the initial stages of the reaction. With 1x amount of enzyme, the slope was smaller than it is twice the amount of enzyme, okay? Now you can get quickly stuck, right, looking at the overall shape of the graph. And somebody asked in the last class, well, wait a minute, why is this plateau greater than this plateau? And the scoring guide gives you some insight into why the graphs might look different, right? For the two lines that are both representative of having twice the amount of enzyme present, right? It says in the first bullet point it says, but the overall final product concentration remains the same, right? That's why the two lines are meeting at the same plateau point. And in the second line, more product is formed at each time point because twice as much enzyme is present, product formation levels off as enzyme loses activity, right? So the second line has a higher plateau because the argument is that we're not just producing the same amount of product faster, that we're actually producing twice as much product as the reaction progresses. But either of those two answers, either of those two lines are entirely correct. And I don't want to belabor this point because we don't have a ton of time, but that is a recurring theme on the AP exam. The College Board is not going to ask you for one correct answer. They're going to ask you for an answer that is illustrative of your understanding of the concept. Okay, so either of those two lines would earn you credit for this particular question. So again, pausing. Questions, concerns, curiosities. So in a perfect world, we would have had a chance to manipulate this variable, right, in lab, in an in-person lab where everybody was in the classroom, right? Change the concentration of enzyme, look to see how changing the concentration of enzyme influences the rate of the enzyme catalyzed reaction. We predict that if we double the amount of enzyme, if we triple the amount of enzyme, it doesn't matter, that the rate of the reaction would go faster, okay? And indeed, that is exactly what we expect, and the data supports that claim, right? But changing enzyme concentration is not the only variable that we can manipulate which influences the rate of an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So another variable that we can manipulate, and we could have manipulated had we had the time and everybody here in the classroom together, right, is the concentration of substrate, right? So it's kind of the opposite. Now we're not going to change the concentration of enzyme. We're going to keep that concentration a constant, but we're going to change the amount of substrate. So maybe we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different reaction tubes, right? And everything about those reaction tubes is the same, except for the amount of substrate that's present. Maybe when we want to simply increase it as you move across, okay? And here is a question that asks us to consider what might be happening as we increase the concentration of substrate while keeping the concentration of enzyme the same. So take a moment and think about what might be happening here. This one's a little bit harder. It's okay not to be sure. See what you can come up with. All right, try to get your answer in. This is one way that I'm monitoring that you're here, that you're participating. It's okay if you're not sure. Talk about it. All right, let's take a look. See what you're coming up with. Yeah. The substrate's being consumed, right? So you all change your answers. But if the substrate's being consumed, shouldn't there be a point at which the reaction goes faster? Because there's more substrate present, right? If I'm increasing the amount of substrate in each of my little reaction tubes while everything else is being held constant, well, wait, I'm increasing a reactant, right? If there's more reactant present, the reaction should be moving faster. It shouldn't be plateauing like it is between 3 and 5 minutes on the graph. Well, actually, it makes total sense that it's plateauing between those two time points. And the reason why, let's scroll ahead here a little bit, is again, I keep saying the same thing again and again and again. The amount of enzyme in each of those little reaction tubes is being held constant. It's the amount of substrate that's changing, okay? So when there's just a little bit of substrate, and in this diagram, ligand is synonymous with substrate. Don't let that confuse you, okay? When the concentration of substrate is really low, like it is over here at point A, there's more enzyme than substrate. So the reaction is happening, right? But it's happening pretty slowly because, heck, it's going to take some time and some collisions between the enzyme molecule and the substrate molecule in order to form the product, to get the reaction to occur. But as I increase the concentration of substrate, and again, ligand is just synonymous with substrate. As I increase the amount of substrate, but I don't change the amount of enzyme, right? There comes a point at which all of the enzyme molecules are interacting with substrate. And they're converting the substrate into product as fast as they possibly can. And I can pour more substrate, more reactant into the mix, but the enzymes are binding to the substrate and converting the substrate into product as fast as they possibly can. You know, one way to think about it is that if you have this enzyme molecule and it's binding to substrate and it's producing product, as soon as it releases the product, it quickly binds to another molecule of substrate. We call this the saturation point as biologists. The enzyme is saturated with substrate. It's converting the substrate into product as fast as it possibly can. But as a consequence, right, the rate of the reaction can't increase linearly towards infinity. It begins to plateau, right? Because the amount of substrate that's available is so high that the enzyme is interacting with it as quickly as it possibly can. All right? So we can increase the rate of an enzyme catalyzed reaction, right, by increasing the amount of enzyme. That works. Heck, we can increase the rate of an enzyme catalyzed reaction by increasing the substrate concentration as well. But there's a limit to which we can actually do that. because at some point the enzyme will be saturated with substrate. So does that bring up anything for you before we try one more variable? Okay. Skip that one for now. So there's lots of other practice questions in the notes that you can take a look at if you think you need to. But let's try one more variable. And in fact, there's two variables that you may have played with in the virtual experiment. And some people here in the classroom got a chance to play around with one of the other variables as well. In the virtual experiment, you could change the temperature of the reaction mixture. You could change the pH of the reaction mixture. Here in the classroom, based on the time that we had available, I didn't think changing the temperature would be really meaningful to you, but some folks did have a chance to change the pH of the reaction mixture. I'm going to go ahead and focus with the time that we have left this morning on the effect of pH on an enzyme catalyzed reaction. But suffice to say that everything that I'm about to describe in these last few minutes of class applies to the effect of temperature as well. Okay, so temperature and pH can often be thought of as affecting the enzyme catalyzed reaction in very similar ways. But I'm going to focus on pH. So in this scenario, it's a very simple scenario. Two enzyme catalyzed reactions, both, oh, sorry, that's temperature. Go ahead to the pH one. There it is. Okay. So two identical reaction conditions, except, I guess they're not really identical, they're similar. One reaction is occurring at pH 6, the other reaction is occurring at pH 8. So I'm making an assumption here that some of your background knowledge from chemistry is carrying over to this class, right? We do not have time to discuss the pH scale, right? Hopefully you remember that pH 6 is more acidic than pH 8, which is more basic. Hopefully you remember that pH 6 has more protons present in solution than a solution at pH 8 does, okay? So one solution is more acidic, not that acidic, it's pH 6. One solution is more basic, pH 8, right? So what's happening to the enzyme molecules at these different pH values? Well, let's start with the pH of 8, okay? Let's say that our enzyme molecule is perfectly capable of doing its job, right? Binding to substrate and converting substrate into product at pH 8. And then we go ahead and run that same reaction at a lower pH value. So, you know, again, thinking about this, there's some review here. pH 6, pH 8. pH 6 has a greater concentration of protons. I am not going to the level of hydronium in a class like this. pH 8 has a lower concentration of protons. Okay. We know from earlier, right, that amino acids have side groups. And it's the side groups that instill the chemical properties on those individual amino acids. And we can link those amino acids together into a polypeptide. I'm thinking of the model that we played around with recently, a couple weeks ago now, actually, where those side groups with their own chemical properties, right, will fold into a three-dimensional shape, will fold into a protein, but the way that that polypeptide folds is determined, at least in part, and really to a great extent, based on the interactions between those side groups, okay? And I'm gonna focus specifically, in the case of pH, on this interaction down below, okay? So this, what I want you to envision is the molecule shown on the screen right now is the molecule in its three-dimensional form, in its tertiary form at pH 8. And it's working, it's doing its job. It's converting substrate into product. But then I lower the pH. And by lowering the pH, again, I increase the concentration of protons. Okay. Well, if there's more protons present, and protons are just positively charged ions, heck, they're just protons, right? Some of those positively charged ions might interact with my negatively charged carboxyl group. Remember that carboxyl groups are acidic. They release protons into solution. They have a negative charge. Well, at pH 8, that negative charge was responsible for holding the three-dimensional structure of this protein, of this enzyme, together. But if I lower the pH to pH 6, well, wait a minute, there's more protons present now than there were before. And some of those protons might very well interact with that negative charge and neutralize it. And if that negative charge is neutralized, well, the interaction between that positively charged side group and that negatively charged side group, it goes away. It no longer exists. And now that part of my folded polypeptide, that part of my protein, it's not folding in the same way. The structure has changed. And if the structure of that protein has changed, if the structure of that enzyme changed, there's a really good chance that the activity, the ability of that enzyme to convert substrate into product has also changed. Okay? So when I change the pH, and the same applies to temperature, if I change the temperature, especially if I increase the temperature, I'm going to disrupt the interactions that are responsible for holding that protein together. I'm going to change its structure, and I'm probably going to change its function as a result. Okay? So with that in mind, let's try one last practice question. Here it is. Get your answers in. All right. Let's take a look. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. We're raising the pH in this example, right? So the effect on the protein will be different, right? We're not going to target those negatively charged side groups. We're actually going to target those positively charged side groups because they have an additional proton associated with them. And if I increase the concentration of hydroxide ion, which is the effect of raising the pH, holy chemistry, I'm going to start ripping those protons off. And the positive charge will be neutralized. And that interaction between the positively charged side group and the negatively charged side group is going to go away. And the shape of the protein is going to change, and the function of the protein is going to change. And since this protein is an enzyme, the activity of the enzyme will decrease. Okay? Well done. All right. So I just wanted to end the semester and this class with a thank you. This has been super challenging for me as a teacher, as an educator. I know that it's been challenging for many of you as well. So I thank you for showing up, for doing the best you can with what you got each and every day. I know that it always hasn't been easy, but I wanted you to know that I appreciate your effort. Okay, and I'm hopeful that things will get better-ish as we move forward. But I also know that when we get back together on January 5th, that it's going to look a lot like it does today. So let's be prepared, and yet be grateful for the fact that we are here and we are healthy, and we're doing the best that we can with what we've got each and every day. So thank you, and be well, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice break.
Love you so much.
Thank you.
So much love. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.